come to Tuxford in Nottinghamshire to have a look around the Museum of the Horse, a collection of everything equine. It's the only one of its kind in the UK and has been put together by Sally Mitchell, who is going to show us around. The museum endeavours to collect and conserve rare and interesting items for posterity to educate and entertain.
Let's go inside and we'll take a look around. So Sally's going to tell us about the history of the building because it is fascinating. We're going to start with this wall.
The wall is curved because this would once have been an outside wall, and it's curved so that the carriages wouldn't catch their wheels on the corner. It is an old coaching inn, and this building's been here since soon after 1702. There was a coaching inn here recorded in the 1500s, or at least an inn from the 1500s, but there was a massive fire in Tuxford in 1702 when the whole of this side of the road was burnt down. There was a public collection throughout the country for it, and as far away as Reading there are records of money being collected for the people of Tuxford. This is a mail coach, one of only 3 thought to be left in the country, and we're very fortunate to have it on loan here. The mail coaches were invented by a chap called John Palmer in the 1790s. He was so dissatisfied with the service from the stage coaches, which were unreliable, and to the extent that if you wanted to send money by a stagecoach, you were recommended to tear it in half and send one half on the first stage and the other half on the next stage. To make the coaching world much more efficient, Palmer designed the mail coach, and he put a guard on the back who had a locked clock that was set when he left the post office in London, and he couldn't adjust it. As he stopped at each inn, he passed the time to the innkeeper, hence the saying, passing the time of day. There were a limited number of passengers carried, and the passengers would sit on the seat behind the coach driver, and the seat that hangs over the edge there, if you'd left the post office at 8 o'clock at night, as the coaches did, on a warm night, chances were you might fall asleep, and sometimes, if you fell asleep, you dropped off, which is where the saying comes from. You had inside passengers and outside, hence insiders and outsiders. The guard sat at the back, and as well as his lock clock, he had a blunderbuss and a sword. So he was able to deter thieves as there were on the roads.
And you were saying that we get some of the other phrases from the coaches.
Oh yes, that's true, yes. You have a dashboard on the front of the coach, which of course travels to the car, and you have a boot at the back, which the car also has. There was very little room in the coach, so you can imagine if there was a rather overweight person beside you, you'd have a pretty cramped journey. The coaches rocked about and they could make you travel sick, and you'd be in there for hours. You couldn't stop the coach if you wanted to. The driver wouldn't hear you, and the guard wouldn't allow the delay. The guard was responsible for getting the mail through, and if you broke down, then he would take one of the horses and the mailbags to get the mailbags through. So if you were stuck in snow, you could be sitting there for hours until someone rescued you. And that was first-class travel.
So this carriage was built for 4 inside, would it be?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And interestingly, I don't know whether you remember the way the train windows used to open with a cord,
yeah.
Yes, and a button. Well, that comes from these. This is how their windows worked.
Huh. And they're all numbered.
Yes, they were all numbered. And the coaches were very well looked after. After every journey, they were taken back to the coach builder, to be serviced, ready for their next trip. And one coach would go all the way from London to Hull or even to Edinburgh. They did long journeys.
And how many times would the horses be changed in that journey?
Roughly every 10 miles.
It's just a lot of horses, isn't it?
Oh, yes, yes. The job masters were very important people. The job masters were those who provided the horses. And usually pretty successful, wealthy businessmen.
So we're going to go inside the building now, and there's so much to see in here that we've asked Sally just to show us her favourite bits, because there's so much. We could spend hours and hours of video just showing you.
I'll show you the sleigh. This would have been the young Dutchman's sports car of around 1790, 1800.
The artwork on it.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Is that original? Or has that
Yes.
been touched up? Or
No, but I don't think it has, no. He would have sat on the back and his girlfriend would have sat inside. And it would have been pulled by ponies. The ponies would have worn bells because on snow you wouldn't hear it coming, and the brakes aren't very efficient. The brake is simply something that you push down into the snow.
you can see where the design for the Father Christmas type sleigh
Yes,
comes from, can't you? With that,
you?
and
Yes.
with the bells as well, as you said.
Yes,
It's so ornate.
it's beautiful, isn't it? I bought it to put up in the museum, but of course it didn't occur to me that it would be too wide to go through any of the doors.
So where did you come across this?
In an auction. Mm.
So we're going to go upstairs now, and there are so many rooms up here with so many objects. And even if you're not a big horse fan or a horse lover, then there's something for you to see here. From military, post office, recreation, racing, all sorts. Weighing scales here for jockeys.
You're saying these were the first
The-
type of weighing scale?
Yes, yes, they were pretty early ones, yes. London made, but I bought them in Dublin. But I couldn't find out whose yard they came from.
You managed to find a lot of things at auctions, haven't you?
Yep.
So we're in a saddle room now. From various stages of history. And over in this cabinet, we'll let Sally tell you, but there are some fascinating old saddles here.
This is generally the history of the side saddle, from the early two-pommel to invention of the leaping head, which is the third one, and then the far pommel disappears and you end up with these two pommels, which give a much more secure seat. This is what's known as a selle fermier, which is a farmer's wife saddle designed for someone elderly or infirm to sit sideways with their feet on the planchette, and someone would lead them. They've been around since the days of Chaucer. That's a 19th century one. This is an early pillion saddle. Pillion saddles were for the lady to sit on the rump of the horse behind the man, and you had a double horse to carry them, and a number of double horses are recorded in the stables of Henry VIII for the use of people in the palace. Those are safety stirrups designed for riding side saddle so that you wouldn't get dragged if you fell off.
So I'm probably being a bit thick here. So which is the front and which is the back of this saddle then? Is that where she holds, or is that where she... You're right, yeah, okay. It just looks very sloped for sitting on.
But when you think of a horse's rump,
Yeah.
it does slope, and they'd have sloped more in those days because they wouldn't have been big fat rumps like we have today. It's not just us that have got fat, you know.
And this box is fascinating as well.
Yes, this is a travelling trunk, a royal travelling trunk from 1697. The weight of it must have been enormous when it was full of goods. And it would have travelled on an open track, hence the curved top and the covering of animal skin so that the rain would wash off it.
Mickey, if you're watching over in Montana, you're going to be fascinated by some of this stuff because there's a lot of cowboy stuff here. And we thought we'd show some of that for you. And this is Canadian cowboy stuff as well, and Montana's in the Rockies, or around the Rockies. And I've been fascinated by the ornate leatherwork in a lot of these saddles.
Isn't it? Yes, quite amazing. That's an unusual saddle there. That's a Native American saddle. We're very lucky to have that because they are quite hard to find. And if you found one in America, you wouldn't be able to export it anyway. I was lucky that someone sent this to England in the 1950s, and so I was able to buy it. That little piece in the front, the little spike at the front, which is partly broken off, is where the baby used to hang, the papoose, hung down there.
Really?
Down the side of the shoulder, yes. You don't think of the Native Americans having saddles, but they did, particularly the ladies, and that would have been covered in colourful blankets, and it would have had beads hanging down from the back and the front. It would have been very decorative.
Because, I don't know what the wording is that you're allowed to say these days, cowboy and Indian films, you never saw the Indians with saddles on, did you?
No, that's right. But
Like
in
bareback,
fact,
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
but actually quite a lot did have saddles. And it's covered in, what is it, buffalo hide, covered in buffalo hide. And some of the woodwork underneath is old packing cases.
Really?
Yeah. That's a Mexican cowboy saddle, child's cowboy saddle, and that's a Brazilian one.
It's a lot flatter, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. That's Argentinian. That's a more recent one. And that's a lady's astride American saddle. That's the McClellan saddle, which was the American military saddle, and still used, I think, by the police over there today. And underneath is a rare Grimsley saddle. That's a much earlier military saddle. And that's a plantation saddle. Oh yes, those are gas mask canisters, American ones, and you can see the shrapnel marks on them, burn marks on them.
You got your glasses? Please. We shared. On the leatherwork on the inside, when the flaps lift up, it says right canister carrier horse's gas mask. WHG4.
On it. Good.
These are?
These are South American stirrups, all hand carved, all carved from one piece of wood. And basically the shoe-shaped ones were to protect the foot in the bush. The metal one is a Brazilian one. And it has a hole in the sole to let the rain out.
See that there?
The spurs are really more for show, and a big rowel like that with lots of points in was far less damaging to a horse than a single spike, because it would roll rather than push in.
They do look quite nasty, don't they?
Oh, they do, yes. They look impressive, don't they?
Well, they look impressive, yeah.
And those are the South American status symbols. They were the very wealthy, the Rolls Royce of South America.
And up the top we've got a lasso.
Indeed. And 2 more pairs of stirrups. A lot of laminated leather stirrups.
And bridles.
Yep, again South American. And a North American prism hitch bridle. That's made of horsehair. That's a beautiful stirrup.
Collection that you really need a patron, don't you, to
Yes.
help you.
Yes.
And these are Pat Edry's riding breeches, boots and whip, and his saddle.
And saddle, yes.
And the size of the racing saddles compared to the saddles we've seen so far is amazing.
It's all about weight. It's really just something to hang the stirrups on.
Mm.
So what would a racing saddle be made of these days?
Well, I presume still plastic. That's
Right.
plastic.
And this saddle on the other side, on the right-hand side of Pat Edry's, is an old racing saddle.
Yes, that was Charles Wood's saddle. Charles Wood won the Triple Crown. He was a champion jockey in 1887, and he was selected to be the Queen's jockey. But unfortunately, he got embroiled in a betting scandal.
Do things change?
Unfortunately, I think you were just lucky if you didn't get caught. And so that really finished his racing career. That's generally the history of horseshoes.
Again, you for a novice or uninitiated in horses, you just think of one shape of horseshoe.
You do, yes. Well, you can see in the middle there, those are mule and donkey shoes. You can see they have a totally different shaped foot. Down at the bottom here, that leather one at the back there is for mowing the lawn. In fact, the other two also, they're bog shoes, the ones on the outside, for working on really boggy ground. What do we see?
There are also the original cork skull cap of the racers. wasn't introduced into the 1920s. And then the chin straps weren't made compulsory until 1962. So very basic head protection, really, I suppose.
Yep. Health and safety hadn't reared its ugly head.
I mean, we were looking at some of the dressage stuff, weren't we, as well? And we were saying about how the headwear for that has changed these days.
Absolutely, yes, yes. Yeah, you wear helmets for everything now. Children's saddles. Miniature saddles.
Fascinating story about this.
The
isn't there?
cartwheel.
The cartwheel, yes.
Yes, yes. There's a little known law that a man can pee against the back wheel of his wagon. And that comes from this, because the cartwheel had a metal tyre to it, and when you were going down a hill, the wheel was kept still, so the metal would grind along the ground. So you put a shoe underneath it to protect it so it didn't get worn out. And by the time you got to the bottom of the hill, the shoe would be red hot. So the men used to get out and pee on it to cool it down.
And the old tradition still holds fast. We've been looking at the old coach. Now we've got some coach lamps as well.
And if you look at some of the designs, you can see how they carried on into the first cars as well, the horseless carriages.
That's the belfry that they used on horses pulling a dray, and drays were pulled on chains, so you couldn't back a loaded dray backwards. So everybody had to know who was coming so they could get out of the way. And it said that the bells were tuned in such a way that you knew who it was who was coming.
Right.
It's too irresistible, isn't it?
But imagine that behind the poor horse's ears all day.
There's certainly some cruelty back in the day, whether it was intentional or not.
Yes, absolutely. To everything. To everything. That's an English collar and a Scottish collar. The Scottish collar has the tall peak, and it's reflected again in the saddles.
So talking about cruelty, we come to pit ponies.
Yes, indeed. Pit ponies in the 19th century, when they went into the pit, they didn't come back out again. They spent their lives down there. And it was a dangerous place. They say some pits killed as many as 5 ponies a week. The pony would have this hung on it at the beginning of the day, which is iron and really heavy, and the trucks would be slotted on to the back. And the man was paid by the amount of coal he could produce, and so overloaded the wagons, and sometimes they would jump off and they'd run back down the slope into the pony behind and crush it. So because of that, they had to have a killing hood, because you couldn't shoot a pony underground because of the risk of explosion. And so you had to put a blindfold on and knock a bolt through his head. But they say the men were better, well, the ponies were better looked after than the men, because if you lost a pony, you had to buy another one. But if you lost a man, there was always another one ready.
So this is all about coaching in this room.
Victorian taxi.
That's right, exactly, yes.
And I remember as a child at primary school, there was a local milkman delivering milk on a cart like that, and the horse would just go up and stop where he knew the milkman had to ladle out some milk.
Horses are very intelligent. They do learn these things. My horses have the run of the yard, but they understand house is where they live, and house for tea, and they go in and wait for their tea.
You were saying about the time, the locked clock on the coach.
Yes,
And
that's
this is
the
what?
locked clock. Yep. That was the clock that the guard couldn't alter, and so they had to run to time, and there were very severe penalties if they didn't.
And my mum used to tell me stories when I was little about my grandma delivering milk on a wagon as well.
Yes. Those are hat boxes. That's a bicorn hat box, and a little mushroom-shaped hat box. Those would have been piled on top of the coaches when they were travelling.
When we looked in here before, we were saying to Sally that we'd been to Appleby Horse Fair a few years ago and that we were fascinated with the old wagons and the way, well, some of the newer wagons as well, but the way they were made to look traditional.
They're amazingly decorated, aren't they?
Mm.
That's a coachman's outfit. That's so heavy I can barely carry that.
Wow.
With those layers of heavy felt to keep the cold and rain off. And that is from Bertram Mills Circus, the small outfit. He used to drive the miniature coach, which was their marketing thing.
The finest, was known to be the finest circus in England.
Yes, yes.
It's a name that I know, but I didn't know anything about them.
Interesting. Somebody put on a display at Olympia, and Bertram Mills, who was a great coaching man as well, went to watch, and he said, "This is appalling." He said, "I could do better than that." And so he did. And he became the leading circus.
And we wanted to show you this bit. With us having a camper van, you know that we have a porta potty in the camper van. But look at this. A carriage commode.
It's beautifully designed. That lid fits so perfectly over it. And those are postilion boots that on the continent, the coach was pulled by riders on the horses rather than driven from the box seat. And so they are made of boiled leather and iron bands to protect the rider's leg from the pole that goes up between the horses.
They look fairly weighty as well.
Yes, very hefty. They're what Puss in Boots wore, 7-league boots, because that's roughly the distance between each halting. 7 leagues is about 10 miles, depending on the terrain, but roughly. And those are gambados. They are strapped onto the saddle, and you put your leg inside them to keep your boot and your breeches clean when you're travelling.
At first glance, they remind me of old diving boots.
Yes.
The weighted boots.
Yeah, they do look like them,
yeah.
don't they?
Then up here's some fascinating history as well.
This is the outfit, the ceremonial outfit for the coachman from Princess Diana's home, Althorpe. And then there's a royal musician's coat. That apparently is the oldest design in the royal household uniforms. It's about 300 years old apparently, not that coat, but the design. And down there are Oxfordshire Hussars boots, and you can see the wrinkling on them, the intentional wrinkling, and I'll show you a boot last that they were made on.
one other thing that Sally was telling us about her collection is that it's come from all over the place. And often when she shows you the last in a bit, she'll tell you an interesting story about that. But it's quite fascinating that she's managed to buy things because other people haven't actually known what they were selling, which is amazing, really, isn't it?
And of interest to me is this couch model. It's Joseph Crossfield's, or Crossfield. I always got told off at school calling it Crossfields. It's Crossfield. Warrington. And that's where my dad was the personnel manager.
And this is actually a horse bus.
Yep, an omnibus.
And an interesting little aside about buses in Warrington, which I'll let Keith tell you these days, or back in the 60s, 70s.
Back in the day. The Thankyou Street was very narrow, and they had to get buses specially made, about 6 or 7 inches short, narrower than the standard one. So they had to buy several years in advance rather than, yes.
I can remember in Luton in Bedfordshire, they had a bridge that was quite low and the buses could just get under it, but they kept resurfacing the road. And one day it didn't get under it.
We'll have a brief look in this room. This is a rest of the world room, and it's got saddles from around the world and other bits of equipment. This is a mounted police saddle from Nottinghamshire Police, which was disbanded. The mounted police in Nottinghamshire were disbanded in 2013, so not that long ago, really.
This amuses me, this saddle, because it has a head and a tail. It's African.
I was saying it looks like a snake when you...
It does. I think there's more variety in African pieces than there is in anything else. And these are Moroccan, North Africa. This would have been a marvellous saddle at one time. It was gold. I mean, this is just its cover. It would all have been gold thread and velvet. It would have been very luxurious.
And a different kind of stirrup again.
Yes, that's typical of the African stirrups. Of the Arab stirrups, generally.
Mm.
There we've got Tibet and China, Ottoman and Indian.
And when we were chatting before, I was saying that I never really I never connect the two, India and horses.
We were also saying that they're worldwide, aren't they? We don't know
They are, absolutely.
how they've evolved worldwide.
Those are Italian cowboy saddles. People don't realise the Italians have cowboys, but they do.
And the noise is the dehumidifier just trying to keep the atmosphere and the leather in tip-top condition.
And this is the side saddle room.
And as I was saying, about dressage as well, and the way ladies used to dress with the headwear that are now not allowed to wear or shouldn't wear because of health and safety. And
look at the waist sizes.
They were so tiny. And of course they wore corsets, which I suppose is why they had smelling salts, because if you were nipped in that tightly all day long, you probably did flake out every so often.
because we like to tell you the quirky bits as well, and Sally was telling us that when she got these outfits, she bought some mannequins to show them off, but you couldn't.
No, they were the mannequins were too big for them. Too big round the waist.
Just going back to this one, I remember seeing pictures of the Queen
Yes.
riding side saddle with that sort of dress
Yes,
sort of
absolutely. Yes.
wrapped round the saddle and the horse.
These are the sort of hats they would have worn. That's the sort of 1920s, 30s with the wide brim and the normal bowler. And the tiny bowler is interesting. The hatters used to use those like, what's the word?
Cards. Business cards?
Yeah, no, not a business card.
Gift tokens.
Yeah, gift token, that's right. The brain's going.
It's only because I'm reading it, that's all.
Yeah, a gentleman would go in and pay for a hat for his lady, and he'd be given this, and he'd take that back to her, and she'd go in with it to have her hat made.
Oh, right. And we mentioned the lasts a few minutes ago.
This is the boot last that they would have used to make the hussars' boots, with the creases in the boot. And you can see there's a piece of old leather on the back where they would obviously have added bits of leather to make it the right shape and size for the person who they were making the boot for. I bought it as a wooden leg. It was catalogued as a wooden leg in auction.
Again, like we were saying, some people sell things not knowing what they actually are.
That's right. Well, not many people would know that.
And this saddle here is a modern reproduction, but it's of a knight's jousting saddle.
That would have been made for someone, one of these reenactor people. And it's based on an old military saddle.
You're well snug in there,
Yes.
aren't you? You're not going
You're well protected, yes.
to take some knocking off.
Because
It looks very solid, doesn't it? If you-
jousting,
Yeah.
you know, with the
Yes,
great.
yeah.
That would really support you and protect you. You see the real thing if you go to the Royal Armouries for those. We have over 35 side saddles on show at the moment.
And Sally was saying about the groom's pad, always put on when the groom was on the lady's saddle or horse.
And of course, in those days, the groom would have been a man,
Yes.
and he would have to ride the horse to train it and to take it to the meet. The lady would go in her carriage.
Well, you were saying that it was a sackable offence
It was.
if the groom didn't use the groom's pad on top of the saddle, the
That's
lady's
right.
saddle,
Yes.
upstairs and downstairs.
Well, when you think about it, I expect the groom was pretty grubby
Yes.
with horses all day, and the lady with her very smart dresses
Crinolines and...
couldn't shove them in the washing machine in those days.
And this one,
Yes, that's
again for our American subscribers and viewers, a Wells Fargo agent's saddle.
it's falling to bits, but it's a beautifully made saddle with fabulous leather. It was really made for work.
Yes. And comfort, you wouldn't mind sitting in that for all day.
Absolutely, yes. Early Tibetan saddle. thought to be from the days of Genghis Khan. Do I mean Tibet? Where did Genghis Khan come from?
That way.
Somewhere that way.
Somewhere over there, wasn't he?
The size of this saddle
Yes.
compared to some of the others.
It is
It's
very,
very
small.
small,
Maybe
isn't it?
it was a child, or maybe they just were.
But they were
pretty
small people, yeah. But
You didn't have overweight
the saddle
people.
itself is still large,
Yes,
isn't it?
it is, the saddlecloth, yes, which is very old. I suspect that might be older than the saddle.
It is a real privilege to be allowed to not only come and look at this stuff, but actually to be able to touch it as well and touch a piece of history.
I'll have to work out some dates of Genghis Khan and that sort of...
Yeah, and we'll put all that in the description.
That's the collection it came from. It's illustrated in the book of that collection. He was a friend in Belgium, and when he died, his collection was sold off, and that came from it.
It's the history that I find fascinating.
It is, there's so much history to it.
The stories that could
tell.
tell, yeah.
Yeah.
If you, as we said earlier, if you're not even really interested remotely in horses, you still need to come here if you can. It's in Nottinghamshire. We'll put address and all the details below, but you need to come because I can't find a word apart from wow. Really nice.
And you said earlier about
Yes, this trunk.
this trunk.
This trunk is off a private carriage, travelling carriage of about 1800, and it's curved to fit around the body of the carriage. And I picked that up for £25 in auction very recently.
Yes.
I know it's not a great work of art, but it's
Well, it's
fascinating.
another fascinating part of history,
Yes,
isn't
Got
it?
history, hasn't it? Yeah,
Hasn't
that's-
it?
yeah.
Yes.
There's so much else we could show you that we could fill numerous videos. Lots of artwork as well from different periods. And this room smells lovely. This really does smell of leather.
That's a child's
Yeah.
Western cowboy saddle.
So in Britain, England especially, what is the most popular form of riding now? Is it just...
Good question. You know, I'm really not sure. There are a lot of people that are just content to hack around.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people who show jump. There's quite a lot of dressage riders. There are quite a lot of side saddle riders now, you'd be surprised. And of course racing is a big industry.
Yeah.
I suppose that's the biggest industry. Now that would be from many soldiers in World War One were injured, maybe lost a leg or his leg no longer worked, and so being tough they kept hunting and they had saddles made to accommodate them. And that would have been to take a wooden leg or
Protect the stump or...
yes.
Yeah. Californian saddle.
It is, yes. I picked that up in auction. They catalogued it as an unusual saddle and they didn't think it worth illustrating. So I took a gamble on it and I couldn't believe my eyes when it came home.
And again, the detail in this one is...
Yes,
This is African saddle from Chad, but just look at that. You have to, again, going back to thinking about what stories it could tell, who made that, and how long did it take them, and their life story.
And this saddle,
Garon's saddle.
Garon's saddle,
That was used to bring the deer down off the hills.
after the day's hunting.
Stalking. Very heavy saddle too. In fact, the person I bought that from had used it, and the pony had got into trouble in a bog, and they had so much trouble getting it out with that weight on it that she got rid of the saddle. This is our military room. The horse here is carrying most of the items that would have been carried in World War One, and they reckoned a horse in World War One carried on average 20 stone.
Without the man.
No,
That's just
including
the man, right.
man.
Okay.
Men didn't weigh as much then.
And so many were lost in the First World War.
Horses and men,
Oh,
yes, yes, but horses dreadfully so.
Because you were saying about this
Yep.
horse sling.
Yep, that's a sling that could have been used. I mean, sometimes they used slings to put them onto ships. Sometimes, if they were injured, they'd hang them in a sling. But I just love these wonderful buckles. Aren't they tremendous?
And if you come to this museum, you will learn some new things. I mean, I had never heard of the horse latitudes. And the horse latitudes were where horses, thousands of horses, have been dropped over the sides of ships when they've died. And Sally was telling us another fact that I didn't know, that horses can't vomit. So horses on ships would get seasick and not be able to vomit, and it killed them.
And we had to get them from South America and across the sea for the First World War to come to Europe.
And that's
how
horses
they
on
were.
a ship, yes.
And here it's saying many horses were lost due to this during the Boer War, and lessons were learnt for World War One, when horses were still used. And then we've got gas masks.
This was a World War II gas mask.
Yes, German one, yes. And the next one is post-World War II, Eastern Europe, which is a bit frightening. And horses were very badly affected by gas. It used to burn the skin badly. And that's an anaesthetic mask, a German anaesthetic mask.
Because you were saying before to us that, was it the English
English
used to
mask.
use
Yes,
different masks?
the English mask was really just a Hessian sack. And when they put it on the horse's nose, it thought it was its feed bag, and so it would plunge it to his nose to the ground, looking for the food in the bag. And so they didn't last very long.
And this is
This is for bringing the invalids, anybody injured, back across rough territory. And you could either sit them in it or thread the stretcher through it. But it's an incredibly heavy thing. And this one, as you can see, was never actually issued. It was made in 1945 and right at the end of the war. So it's still got its old wax paper on it.
when we looked at this earlier, I thought this was going to be from the First World War. But
No, this is Second World War.
It's typical military.
Yes.
It's double thickness of everything.
But goodness, it must have been planned to be used on big, strong mules
Yes.
because it's so heavy. In fact, we weighed it. I can't remember what it weighed now, but I know I can't lift one of the baskets, let alone the whole thing.
It's in foreign. It says 95 kilos. I don't know what that is in English.
Neither
We'll
do I.
convert it.
We're showing our age again. That's horses in the lines, and of course the horses were a prime target for the Germans, because if they killed the horses, there was no way of getting the guns to the front.
You have an amazing collection.
Thank you.
And it's nice to find someone like you who's put the time, money and effort into collecting it for future generations.
I'm just mad.
Well, we're all a little bit mad, but...
I need to find funding so that someone can take it over and
Yeah,
look after
because it'd be a shame for it to be lost.
it. Would.
I mean,
yes.
so many pieces that you've got, you've said, would have been quite easily lost.
They would, yeah. And it would be very, very hard to put this together again. I mean, that bridle is lovely.
This one.
Yes, that's a hussar's bridle. Of course, the word hussars came from the Hungarian, and that design is like the continental bridles. But the theory was that the shells stopped the sword cutting into the face. Whether it really did, I don't know. I think they were just rather vague, but it's very pretty. But that is an English hussar's bridle. And that's a mid-19th century English military saddle.
And more boots.
Yes, I think I have a boot fetish.
I'm not sure you should have meant that on camera. You might get all sorts of questions and visitors.
Those are a general military cavalry boot. That's what was known as a Wellington boot, the small boot. That's what they wore in the 19th century.
The old Wellington boots.
Into the 20th century, yes.
Again, where modern day names come from. Things like that.
Yes, it is. And those boots are what all the troops in the coronation would have been wearing. They must be pretty uncomfortable.
Can I pick one up?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. Because they look heavy. They're not as heavy as I thought, but
No.
they're heavy enough.
But they're just stiff, aren't they?
They are very
Very
stiff,
stiff,
yeah.
yes.
Gosh, yes. You see them walking round off the horse, and they're...
I mean, when you think wearing Wellington boots, how they bang against your bare leg, they must really cut in and rub there. So how long have you been collecting for then?
Nearly all my life. When I was about 10, a dear old farmer, when I was away on holiday, I hated going on holiday because it meant going away from the ponies. So we were staying in a cottage, and I used to go up to this old farmer in the farmyard behind, and he gave me a horse brass, which I've still got. And I suppose that's where it began. And I used to go to a blacksmith, a dear old boy, when I was about 10. And on his wall, he had lots and lots of early horseshoes. And I was fascinated by those. And then, I suppose he died, we stopped going there. And I thought I'd never see the like again. But now I've got something.
Probably one last thing. We were cruel to horses. This is a man trap laid out to catch poachers.
Yeah, well, there weren't so much poachers. The peasants had lived off the land. But when guns were developed enough for use for sporting, for shooting game, the landlords decided they didn't want the peasants living off their game anymore. They wanted to keep it for their sport. And that's when they began to use these.
But as you were saying to us before when you were showing us, they used to have to put signs up to tell people there were man traps around, but obviously the peasants couldn't read.
Yeah, that's it. And if you got your leg in one of those, I mean, you wouldn't survive.
No.
No way. Terrible things, really, terrible things. How about here? Is that all right?
It's fine.
I was my son and I were very lucky to be able to buy this building. We had two little shops down the road for years, which were our gallery and frame department. And we used to look at this building and say what a marvellous gallery it would make. And then one day we heard it had been bought by developers for $500,000. And we said, well, that's it. It'll never be ours. And nothing happened, and nothing happened to the building, apart from the fact that it started to be vandalised and then it was boarded up. And after about 5 years, we made them an offer on it, which they declined. And 2 years later, we came out of the building one day and saw a sign over this building saying that it was being auctioned in 3 days' time. And so we were probably the only people who knew about it. We were the only people there, and we bought it for pittance. We did have to spend a fortune on it because there were holes in the roof and very few windows left. It's mouldy everywhere. And when the agents brought us in to look round it, they had to clear out the mattresses and the needles in the morning before we could come in. And we couldn't see half the building because they didn't know how to get into it. But
it's a project of love.
yes, very much so, yes.
And you've got a coffee shop as well?
The coffee shop is there. It's in our building, but it's not our coffee shop. We rent it to somebody, yes, but it's very useful.
So as you know, we do like a coffee. We can't get one today because it's been opened especially for us today, this museum. So we're very honoured and privileged with that as well. But if you come when the museum's open, and you're open 5-6 days a week?
We're open Monday to Friday, 9 till 4, and Saturdays 10 till 2.
So if you come then, when they're open, you'll be able to grab a coffee and a bit of cake as well.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
But please do share this video and get this place more well known because it's fascinating. It's not your run-of-the-mill museum. It's got so much history.
And so many one-off.
Yeah, quirky items, one-off items, and things that have been saved that probably wouldn't have been saved before. It's well worth a visit. We'll put all the description and the link to their website down below in the description, and we hope that you can come. And if not, just look at the website and give them some love that way.
Thank you.